It is February 2016. We are down under in Australia, where two young travelers named Beatrice and Lena are just kicking off their trip. They thought they were signing up for the adventure of a lifetime. Instead, their dream vacation turned into a total nightmare. Let's start with Lena. When this story kicks off, Lena is a 23-year-old wanderer from Germany. She had spent years fantasizing about visiting the land down under. It was a bucket list item she was desperate to cross off. So, in 2016, she pulled the trigger, planning to soak up as much Aussie culture and scenery as she could. Here is the eerie part. Right before she left, Lena actually watched the horror movie Wolf Creek. If you are not familiar, it is a film where tourists backpacking through the Australian outback get hunted down by a psychopath. She watched it with a buddy, and naturally, the friend was freaked out. They asked her if she was worried about something like that happening for real. Lena just laughed it off, insisting it was pure fiction. But the chilling reality? That movie was actually based on true crimes. Fast forward a bit, and Lena touches down in Australia. Eventually, she checks into a hostel over in Adelaide, a city in the southern part of the country. Hostels are basically social hubs for travelers, and that is exactly where she crossed paths with a woman named Beatrice. Beatrice was also 23, but she hailed from Brazil. Since they were the same age and on the same adventure, they clicked instantly. As they got to talking, they realized their itineraries matched up perfectly. Both ladies were dying to get from Adelaide over to Melbourne. Specifically, they wanted to drive the Great Ocean Road. It is legendary for a reason, beautiful coastal views, totally iconic. We are talking about a trek of roughly 1,000 kilometers, or about 620 miles. You could blast through it in 14 hours, but most folks take 5 days to really enjoy the camping. Naturally, they decided to team up. Why do it alone when you have got a built-in travel buddy? So, the planning began. But there was one major snag. Neither of them had wheels. In Australia, it is super common to hop on sites like Facebook or Gumtree to find rides. Travelers use these boards for everything, finding jobs, getting advice, or in this case, hunting for a travel companion with a vehicle. So, they posted an ad. Two young women looking to hit the Great Ocean Road to Melbourne, searching for a driver to split fuel costs with. They were hoping to catch a ride with someone already heading that way. It was not long before a guy around their age slid into their DMs. He offered them a spot in his car, saying he was making the trip soon anyway. It seemed perfect. Everything was locked in. Then, bad luck struck. Right at the 11th hour, this guy cancels. Apparently, his car broke down or something. Suddenly, they were stranded without a ride. They had to scrap Plan A and start scrolling through their messages again to see who else was out there. Out of everyone who replied to their online post, the only driver actually willing to take them was a 59-year-old local named Roman Hines. Even before meeting him, the vibe was off. His text messages were blunt, almost rude, but the girls brushed it aside, figuring he was just an old-school guy bad at technology. But then he started getting aggressive. If they didn't reply instantly, he'd blow up their phones, demanding they stop wasting his time. Running out of alternatives and desperate to get moving, they eventually agreed to the ride. The date was set for the 9th of February, 2016. On the day of the trip, they headed to the pickup point, and sure enough, Roman was waiting. After a quick, awkward greeting, they tossed their backpacks into his trunk and climbed in. As the engine started, they had no clue they were now trapped in a vehicle with one of Australia's most predatory criminals. Roman Hines was originally from West Germany, having moved to Australia back in 1959 with his family. His personal life was a wreck, 2 failed marriages. And 5 children later, he had developed a reputation for extreme violence and a hair-trigger temper. Worse, he had a rap sheet that should have put him on every police watch list in the country, specifically regarding his internet usage. The details I'm about to tell. You are absolutely blood-boiling. Rewind to 2014. Roman picked up a female hitchhiker in Adelaide, and once they reached a 40, lonely. He was explicitly banned from using technology to hook up with people. But come December 2014, he shattered that probation condition and assaulted another female. Unbelievably, there is no record of him seeing the inside of a cell for that. He walked free. But rewind the clock just 4 weeks. Before the nightmare trip with Beatrice and Lena, Roman had a history with a woman named Sylvia Clark. A mere month before he picked up the backpackers, Sylvia was spending the night at his place. She woke up to a horror movie scenario, her left wrist bound to the bed frame. Panic set in. She scanned the room and saw Roman looming over her. He started striking her, sinking his teeth into her skin. He tried to pry her legs apart by force. Paralyzed by terror, Sylvia stopped fighting. She just let him take what he wanted to survive. After surviving that ordeal, she cut ties and scrapped their upcoming camping excursion to a remote spot known as Salt Creek. But the tragedy is, the humiliation was so crushing that she never went to the cops. That is the kind of monster we are dealing with. And at that very moment, he had 2 unsuspecting young women, trapped in his vehicle, completely isolated. They were making good time toward Melbourne when Roman went off script. Without a word, he made a sharp, unapproved detour straight for Salt Creek. This is a tiny, desolate outpost in South Australia, roughly 164 kilometers from Adelaide. It is the kind of wilderness you do not enter unprepared, extremely isolated, the perfect hunting ground for a depraved predator like Roman to act. Out his sickest urges, he killed the engine and announced they were camping there for the night. The girls were baffled. Look around, not a single soul in sight. The destination was finally visible on the horizon. The ride had been surprisingly smooth, with Roman keeping his cool every time the girls begged to pull over for snapshots. So, to some, even as Roman set up their campsite, a weird vibe settled over the group. He was quiet, almost too quiet, giving the girls a creeping sense of unease. Beatrice pitched in to help with the tents, but Lena was wiped out, so she curled up in the back of their vehicle to catch some sleep. With Lena out of the picture, Roman made his move on Beatrice, claiming he bad-spotted distinct kangaroo tracks nearby. He told her if she wanted those perfect wildlife shots, he could guide her right to them. Relying on his supposed expertise and thinking it was just part of the outback experience, Beatrice agreed. They trekked deep into the isolation of the sand dunes. Minutes ticked by, but the landscape remained empty. Beatrice sensed the deception and suggested they head back, figuring the wildlife was gone, but as she pivoted to leave, the trap sprung. Roman lunged, locking her in a chokehold from behind and tackling her into the dirt. He was armed for a nightmare, hiding a hammer and a blade in his trousers along with a coil of rope. He flashed the knife first, then produced the bindings, a silent warning that resistance was futile. He started to restrain her, but she fought back hard. He countered with a chilling threat. Keep struggling, and he would shatter her arms, making her fate infinitely more painful. He began forcing himself on her, invading her space with unwanted intimacy. She begged him to stop, to just let her go, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. If anything, her terror only seemed to spike his aggression, and he started raining blows down on her. Beatrice realized with terrifying clarity that she might not survive this encounter. Thinking fast, she switched tactics. She looked him in the eye and feigned consent, telling him she was actually into it. But she had one strict rule. They had to go back to the tent for privacy, away from the open dunes. It threw him off balance, but he took the bait. He hauled her up and marched her back toward the site. But as the tents came into view, his predatory instincts flared up again. He must have clocked that. She was leading him into a trap where Lena could intervene. With safety just yards away, he suddenly changed course, dragging Beatrice back toward the wilderness. Knowing this was her last stand, she unleashed a primal scream, shrieking Lena's name, hoping against hope that her friend could save her. Roman panicked and escalated the violence, beating her savagely to knock her cold. But the plan had worked. Lena heard the chaos. She jolted awake to the sound of terror, a nightmare scenario that would freeze most people. Instead, she adrenaline dumped the fear and sprinted toward the noise. She crested the dune to find her friend stripped and pinned in the sand with their attacker looming over her. The scene was horrific, but Lena didn't flinch. She roared at him to let her go. Roman shifted his focus immediately to the new target. He started stalking toward Lena. Beatrice screamed a warning, yelling that he was armed with a knife. Lena bolted for the car, desperate to grab her phone and dial for rescue, but Roman was terrifyingly quick. Before she could even scramble into the back seat, he was on her. He swung the hammer, connecting hard with the back of her skull. The impact was sickening, and blood instantly masked her face. Lena was dazed, her reality shifting from a nap to a bloodbath in mere seconds, witnessing her friend's violation and now taking a hammer blow to the head. The disorientation must have been overwhelming, yet her survival instinct kicked in. She entered a life-or-death grapple with the man, who had gone completely feral. During the scuffle, the hammer found its mark 3 more times, inflicting grievous wounds. Despite losing a dangerous amount of blood, she managed a superhuman feat. She broke free. As she fled, Roman jumped into his vehicle and fired up the engine. Lena didn't run for safety. She ran to Beatrice. The 2 victims were reunited, Beatrice exposed and traumatized, her terror compounding. As she saw the mangled state of her friend, there was no time for words. They saw the car barreling toward them. In that split second, they made a tactical choice to scatter. Beatrice dove into the dense bush of the dunes to hide, while Roman locked onto Lena and floored it. The chase was on. For over 1 kilometer, he hunted her down in the 4x4 while she sprinted for her life into the remote sands. She ran in erratic zigzags, desperate to keep from being crushed under his wheels. Roman was relentless. If she paused for a second, she would meet a gruesome end. She pushed her body past its limits. Baking heat, massive blood loss, and blunt force trauma were taking their toll, and Lena started to fade. She knew she couldn't outrun a motor vehicle forever. It seemed hopeless, but she wasn't done fighting. Thanks to the soft sand, Roman bogeyed down, getting stuck just long enough for her to gain ground. But as he freed the tires and surged at her again, Lena did the unthinkable. She turned and charged the car. She leaped onto the hood and scrambled up to the roof. She was bleeding out so badly that red droplets started pattering against the metal like rain. Roman went berserk, screaming at her to get off while he swerved and accelerated, trying to buck her loose. Miles away, Beatrice was cowering in the brush, having no idea if her friend was dead or alive. Then the rumble of an engine broke the silence. Beatrice knew this was her only shot. Traffic out here was non-existent. The vehicle held a group of young guys on a road trip, just taking in the views, when suddenly a naked, hysterical woman burst onto the track, waving frantically. The guys were stunned, obviously having zero context for what was unfolding, but they let her in immediately. Beatrice spilled the story. A maniac had attacked her, and her friend was still out there facing death. The authorities were contacted, but help was miles out. The guys wanted to drive Beatrice to safety, but she stood her ground. She begged them to drive back into the danger zone, back toward where Roman had chased Lena. They agreed. While they scanned the horizon, Lena was still clinging to the roof of the attacker's car. Finally, Roman slammed on the brakes. He got out and ordered her down. Lena played her hand. She would get down only if he tossed the knife and hammer as far as he could throw them. Roman scoffed, calling the whole nightmare silly before chucking the weapons. He suddenly switched his demeanor, acting bizarrely calm, urged Lena to get back in the rig. Roman fired up the engine and steered the car toward the campsite. Lena was basically running on, fumes at that point. She was completely drained. But then, as they cruised along the beach, she noticed a crew of fishermen near the water. This was it, her only shot. She shoved her blood-soaked arm out the window and waved like her life depended on it. The group looked up and froze a woman's limb dangling from the vehicle, painted red. It shook them to their core. Without hesitation, they realized what was happening, jumped into their trucks and gunned it, tailing Roman closely, desperate to intervene. Against all odds, these local heroes managed to box Roman in, forcing his car to a grinding halt. Lena threw the door open and sprinted toward her rescuers. Roman, seeing the game was up, decided to cut his losses. He slammed on the gas, fleeing the scene to outrun the law. But the headline here is that the victims were finally out of harm's way, while Roman was a fugitive. First responders swarmed the beach, and the survivors received urgent care. Lena was in critical condition. She had gone toe-to-toe with that monster for hours, sustaining massive trauma, and the blood loss was severe. By the time the ambulance rushed her toward the emergency room, she blacked out. While medics worked to save her life, the manhunt for the attacker kicked into high gear. Enter Adam Stewart, a local resident who ran a general store in the area. Since his shop was the only outpost for miles, and because Adam knew the terrain like the back of his hand, investigators asked him to assist in tracking the suspect. Adam was all in. He had a gut feeling about where the fugitive might hide, and his instincts were dead on. They located the suspect quickly. Roman's vehicle was bogged down in the spess, a massive sand dune. Trapped with no exit strategy, Roman was taken into custody immediately. Back at the trauma center, Lena pulled through, though her scalp required staples to hold it together. The scene at admission was grim. She was caked in so much gore and grit that the ER staff initially couldn't tell if they were treating a male or a female. Her features were completely masked. Later, the two survivors were reunited in recovery, sitting there processing the sheer miracle that they were still breathing. The legal hammer dropped, and Roman was indicted on a laundry list of felonies: aggravated kidnapping, indecent assault, intentional harm, endangering life, and unlawful imprisonment. The shocking details of the assault went viral fast. Sylvia, Roman's ex, spotted his mugshot in the tabloids next to the location Salt Creek. A tidal wave of remorse hit her. She couldn't shake the thought that if she had just blown the whistle on his behavior earlier, these two tourists might have been spared. But then again, Roman had a rap sheet for similar offenses, and the system had let him walk before. It is hard to say if her testimony would have changed a thing. Then the terror set in. She recalled Roman planning a getaway to that exact spot, Salt Creek, right before they split. She realized with a shiver that she could have easily been the one in those headlines. The proceedings against Roman kicked off in February of 2017 at the South Australian Supreme Court. Prosecutors laid out a nightmare scenario, displaying graphic images of Lena's wounds and the blood-spattered interior of the perpetrator's car. Sylvia took the stand, recounting her own traumatic history with the defendant. She testified that he had sexually assaulted her previously, even producing photos of the physical aftermath. Shockingly, the judge acquitted him on that specific count, ruling that no sexual assault had officially occurred, proof that even if she had raised the alarm sooner, it likely would have fallen on deaf ears. During the trial, disturbing evidence surfaced. Roman had an obsession with extreme, illegal online material depicting violence against women. The profile was undeniable. This guy was a ticking time bomb. His digital footprint revealed chats with 12 other travelers, trying to lure them into rides across the Australian outback. Make no mistake, Roman was a serial predator just getting started. The jury convicted him, handing down a sentence of 22 years. Odds are he will breathe his last breath behind bars, exactly where he belongs. The survival of those women came down to their own grit and fast thinking, which was absolutely incredible. Add in the heroism of the locals who chased him down, guys who risked it all without knowing if he was armed, and you have a story of pure courage. It is moments like this that remind us, even when we are digging through the worst of human nature, there are decent folks ready to step up. However, I have to leave you with a final bone-chilling detail. After this case broke, witnesses came out of the woodwork. They claimed that months prior, they spotted Roman Hines buying gear at a Salt Creek shop. He wasn't alone. A young woman, definitely a backpacker, was riding shotgun. A few days later, he came back through on his way to Adelaide, only this time He was driving solo. The passenger seat was empty. To this day, nobody has identified that mystery girl, and the grim theory is that she lies buried somewhere beneath the Salt Creek dunes. Music,